Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Perek Ches Halacha Vav. We're going to be learning today Daf Ayin Aleph, starting from the top of the Amid by the Mishnah by Halacha. The Mishnah Halacha Vav is going to continue after we discussed Meiser Ani. We're going to be moving on now to other charity funds that are distributed for the poor. And as we'll see here, that there are two types of communal charity funds. One is called tamchoy. The word tamchoy means a plate. Tamchoy was a collection that was made daily, a distribution that was also made daily, collecting and distributing food, not only for the poor residents of the city, but also for non-residents. That's the tamchoy. The other communal fund is called kupa. Kupa means a box. The kupa is a money box that was also collected and distributed, but here once weekly, also for the needs to buy food. That was the kupa, that was the money in the kupa designation was for food, but it was done only for the local residents, and we're going to see the differences between the tamchoy and the kupa. We're going to have certain qualifications and disqualifications for people, for them to be allowed or not allowed to be tzedakah administrators. The Gemara is going to have in today's daf Gavaldik stories. We're going to have a machloikis in the Gemara regarding how much do we need to investigate the authenticity of a person's claim that he is needy, even though we touched upon this already before. And we're going to conclude today's daf by learning a brisa that's going to discuss how long must one live in the city in order for that person to be required to contribute. And as we'll see, the contributions to the kupa, if you only live 30 days in a city, you're chayiv to contribute. There are other funds that we didn't yet discuss, which will be clothing funds, etc. For that, you have to live 6 months in the city to be chayiv, to be obligated to participate in the donation of clothing. And for all other city taxes, as we'll speak out, you have to be a resident. A proper resident is only after you live in a city for 12 months or more. Without any further ado, let us start. Mishnah Halacha Vav, all the way on top of the Amud Daf Ayin Aleph. Says the Mishnah, Ein poichasin la'ani ha'over mimakim l'makim. As we mentioned before, that the food, the tamchoy, the food distribution isn't only for people that live locally. It's also for people that are travelers. Actually, as we'll see in a moment, being that the kupa, even though it's money, the purpose of the kupa was for food, and it was given once a week, and it was given dafka to locals. It was very common that the locals did not collect from the tamchoy because they already had the funds for food. How masha'enkein, the tamchoy was sometimes only given to the travelers. So what is the minimum amount? So the minimum is mikikar bepudyon, a loaf of bread that costs a pudyon, and that is when ma'ar b'soyin b'sela. We already had this before. When the cost of wheat 4 saw you acquire with 1 selah. Bottom line will be, as we mentioned, that there are 48 pudyons in 1 selah. It's going to chop that 1 kav is going to be 2 pudyons. 1 pudyon will be a half a kav. Really, as we explained, the ani will get a bit less than that because the ani will have to pay for the expenses of the baking of the bread. But that type of loaf is exactly enough what one needs for 2 meals, having half a meal in the morning and half a meal in the afternoon. And this is the only obligation that the townspeople have towards the traveling aniyim, is to make sure that they have food for the day. But that is only if they're not going to overnight in the city. But if they're going to spend the night in the city, then in addition to the food requirements that the Bnei Ha'ir are chayiv to give to the ani, also in addition, we have to give him everything that he needs to stay overnight, which is a place where to sleep and a bed and bedding. Now, Shabbos, if the ani is staying over Shabbos, so even though we mentioned that you give him 1 loaf of bread, which is food for 2 meals, but for Shabbos, you have to give him more food. The chiyuv on Shabbos is to have shalosh shudas, as we'll speak a few more details soon when we get into the kupa. Okay, now Says the Mishnah, when a person already has that minimum of food for 2 days, whether it's in the form of food, whether it's the money which will help him buy the food, that oni lo yitol min tamchoy may not take from the tamchoy, as we spoke on in our introduction. He has his daily requirements. Tamchoy is only for today. For today, he's not qualified to receive. And therefore, again, the fact was that in most scenarios, being that the kupa was given out to the locals and the kupa was given out Fridays, and you gave the person the money that it will cost to buy 14 meals. So many times, or in most times, the local alniyim did not take from the tamchoy. Now, of course, the tamchoy food is not meant to go to waste. Actually, you can argue that the tamchoy was maybe even an easier collection because people gave their food away. And these foods are perishable. If I'm not going to eat it, it's going to get ruined anyways. So if there's going to be a food in the tamchoy, did they not give it to the aniyim that had money? Could be. But if they had mazon shtei seudas, they're not qualified initially to collect from the tamchoy. Similarly, once a person has either the food or the funds to buy foods of arbe esra seudas for 14 meals, lo yitol min hakupa, that person should not take money from the kupa, which was a weekly contribution that was distributed Fridays, given Fridays, distributed Fridays, and it was the money that it would cost you to buy 14 meals. Before we go on in the Mishnah, let's go down Chedra to the Rashirilio. We're going to 8 lines from the bottom of the right column. Lo yitel min hakupa. So here, let's speak up more details. Hakupa, hima'os, kupa is a money collection. Shugoyven laparnas aniyim, b'nei toivim. And this was given for the aniyim that came from a wealthier background. In other words, the Rashirilio is going to add another nuance. That there is another point that separates kupa from tamchoy, not only daily, weekly, is that receiving food for tzedakah is humiliating for people that have the dignity. And b'nei toivim is a classification that we give to aniyim. B'nei tovim means the sons of good ones. We are all sons of good ones. It means that they used to be wealthy. They themselves were wealthy. They grew up in wealth, or they grew up not being mamish, needing food. So there's a certain humiliation that they don't want to receive food. So here we go. So it's money to be mefanas ani b'nei tovim. The zila luhu milsa the tamchoy. It's very humiliating for them to collect food itself from the tamchoy collection. And what do we do? So what do we do is that we collect their needs in the form of money. Now, the time we're going back to Bavli, Daf Chesamid Beis, and as we will have right now, that the difference between kupa and tamchoy isn't only money, food, but it's also how often was it collected and distributed. The kupa fund mischalekas mi erev Shabbos la erev Shabbos. It was a weekly collection and distribution. Even the yesh lo shtei seudas l'chol yom, and if a person already has his food needs, which is for a week to a day, making it a total into yud daled l'shavua lo yitol, he's not qualified to take from the kupa. Now listen to this. Avol misha yesh lo mazen yud beis yitol. If a person has food for 12 meals, but not for 14 meals, we don't say that he should only be allowed to take the funds for 2 meals. Once he doesn't have the minimum requirement and he qualifies to take from the kupa, he takes the whole 14 meals from the kupa. Yitol means not money for 2 meals, money for a week. That's a very important rule. Then he goes on. How do you get the cheshbon of 12 meals, guys? We just mentioned that on Shabbos you have 13 meals. Well, 3 meals. So if you have 3 meals on Shabbos, 7 times 2 is 14. Well, plus the added meal, it should be 15. Why only 14? The to a day, but Shabbos is special. So over there, the Gemara answers, Umasik, the Amrina lay, we tell this ani, my the boys that which you normally would have eaten on Friday afternoon, don't eat it Friday afternoon. Friday, you have normally 2 meals. Don't have 2 meals on Friday. have one meal in the morning, wait until it's night, not in the afternoon. So now you only had one meal on Friday. On Shabbos, you have 3 meals. That's the 14th. Achle b'Shabsa, Perush, Sharei, we're going to the top of the left column of the Rashi Ilio. You're going to eat a proper meal Friday afternoon. You won't be hungry to eat Friday night. And that's B'chlala halacha. That, having a ti'ima, tasting food, right, having a shtickle l'chaim, maybe a piece of herring is okay, but people have to be cautious what they eat, how much they eat. Erev Shabbos, in order for them not to enter Shabbos when they don't desire to eat. That's not okay. Now, there's another kasha that Rashi Ilio says. Okay, I got it. So the third of Shabbos is Becheshben, the one Friday afternoon. So it equals itself out. 7 times 2 is 14. What about Malava Malka? So the kasha is, the Kupa should give person food for 15 meals. Says that Rashi Ilio, the top left line, the top left column, that what? That lo'olam yisader adam shulchan b'motzei Shabbos. A person should always set up his table on Motzei Shabbos from Malava Malka. So the answer is, the Gemara says over there, if someone has the funds, Masha Enken, if a person is taking the money from the community, that person will not eat a meal for Malava Malka. And perhaps, being that the Minik Chabad is that we don't dafke have a proper Seudah for Shalosh Shudas, even though, as it says in the Hayom Yom, we're all chayiv to have something, like Rabbi Yossi says, Yehi Chelki from the Oichle, Shalosh Shudas. But maybe if the person is going to learn Divrei Elikim Chayim of Shabbos afternoon, then weiter 14 meals will allow that person to have a meal for Malava Malka, but that's not what it says in the Gemara. Let's come back over here. So now we got that clear. So there's a big thing over here. In other words, when it comes to food, same thing. If Reuven has food for one meal, and now they're distributing the tamchui, he doesn't take one meal, he takes 2 meals. If a person has money to buy food for 13 meals, but not 14, so when they distribute the money from the kupa, he doesn't take money for one meal, he takes money for all the 14 meals. And more about that, we're going to learn, God willing, in next daf on daf ayin base. But let's go on. Another difference between the kupa and the tamchui. The kupa, which is again the monetary collection, nigbeis bishnayim, it's collected dafke with 2 people. Now let me explain to you why it's collected with 2 people. Not the way people initially think. It has to do with trust. It's not about that. But there's a big rule, Chevra, and that is that whenever people are forced to participate in a tzedakah fund, and yes, I'm going to use the word force. That's something that we are not familiar with. On one hand, people today are extremely charitable. But on the other hand, no one today is being forced to give tzedakah. You can say there's a social pressure. You can say that the person's godly soul is coercing the animal soul. You can say that. But in those days, it was beyond that. In other words, the community and the people that represented the community vis-a-vis collecting tzedakah, they taxed people. If one said, I will not participate, they had the right to take a mashkin. They had certain tools. They would force people to contribute. And that is called sirara. Guys, it's a sin. It's not a sin. It's sin. Sirara means authority. And once a person is being appointed to have that type of authority of forcefully taxing others, there is a rule, and that is that the minimum amount of people has to be 2. You never allow one by himself to have that type of authority. That's why you have to have 2. So the kupa has to be collected with 2, because ein tzarara pachos mishnayim. I'm reading the words of the Rashi earlier, 3 lines from the top of the left column. It's a big cloud. That is for the kupa. When you give it out, you have to know why you have to have 3. So it says that Rashi Elio, because when they are giving it out, being that who is qualified to take it? Only someone who doesn't even have money or food for one day, for 2 meals. Sometimes people have something. It's not clear how much is that something worth. So there is really a judgment that has to be made. This is a judgment of dinim aminis, whether they're going to receive the money, which is money or food. And there's a rule that a minimum amount of judges to make a judgment are three. That's the Rashi earlier. To fail him, hatuluyim olav, according to the conditions that person has. So this is a very important other thing when we're speaking about giving out whether the kupa food, whether the kupa money or the tamchay food. We're speaking about giving it to the poor and to his family members. And yes, there is a judgment involved over here. It's not just stam that everyone gets the same exact loaf of bread. Speaking about where there's real poverty and there's a real need and people are hungering, and we're going to see soon in the Gemara that when we speak about this type of poverty, giving out food is din in the fashas. To the point the Gemara is going to ask, why don't you have 23 judges? Because when people are starving to death, or if you have children that, God forbid, Rahman al-Islam, during war, they don't have food, these are judgments that could touch life and death. So that's why you have to have, coming back over here, you have to have three. So two because of the Surana, and three for the distribution. Okay, now, this is Gemara. What the Gemara did not speak was Beneged the Tamchay, but the Mishnah did not speak out how many people collect and distribute the Tamchay. We'll get there in a moment. Says the Gemara, as we mentioned in the Mishnah, that the Tamchay is a collection and a distribution that's done daily, only with food. Tamchay b'chol yom. Kupa is a collection and a distribution. It's not always on the same day, once a week for the week on Erev Shabbos. Erev Shabbos, Erev Shabbos. Tamchay l'chol adam. L'chol adam means whether you reside in the city or not. Kupa eina ela la'anshei oisei ir bilvad. Kupa is only distributed to people who live in the city. And therefore, as we said in the Mishnah, in many cases, the locals will never get from the Tamchay. Because once a person gets money every Friday from the kupa, even though it's not food, but it's money for food for a week, you only have the right to collect from the tamchui if you don't even have mazon for 2 seudas. That only has mazon 2 seudas because he got it from the kupa.
Unless he gets it on Thursday.
Unless he gets what on Thursday?
Unless he goes to collect the tamchui.
He's not allowed to collect. If he was given money last Friday, mazon shtei seudas, then he has that.
By the time almost a week passes, he doesn't.
Let me say what Ido is saying in different words. I think we're going to say the same thing now. That if the person was very hungry, or if he did not manage the money properly, maybe even if he threw the money in the garbage, today the guy is hungry. You give him from the tamchui. Correct. Okay. Now let's go back. It says in the Mishnah that akupa nikbeis b'shnayim, but umislachekes b'shloish. Says the Gemara, Rab Chuna Amar, that tamchui that the Mishnah did not mention, not only is it distributed, but it has to be, it's collected by 3. The question is why? Again, tamchui is forced on people, surara, authority. You never allow one to have authority over the community. Isn't this a gavaldik thing? That's the balance of power. Again, it's not about not trusting you. Just a whole institution. You don't allow one person to force. And but why not shnayim? Why do you have to have even a collection by 3? Shuhu al asad. Now, food is perishable. There's different ways of learning these words al asad. We're going to go that since the food is perishable, therefore the collection and the distribution has to happen quickly. You want to have lechatchila more people involved because then the distribution will happen quicker. So you can say, let the distribution happen with 3. No, let the collection happen with 3. The more people involved, the quicker things are going to happen. Money doesn't go off. Food goes off. B'shem Rabbi Bar Zavdon says that ein mamidim parnosin pachos mishloisham. Not like we have in the Mishnah. All right? But let's go to it. Let's go to like the Mishnah. When it comes to distribution, you have to have a minimum of 3. Why? So ano chamei. I see. Meaning I understand the reason. The rule is not debatable. But why do you have to have a distribution of 3? Because it's dinimam and it's b'shleisha. Because what are you doing? You're giving out tzedakah funds. That means you're making a judgment. You cannot judge by yourself. You have to have 3 people. So we're saying since by dinimam you have to have 3. So dinimam food could be din in the fashos, like kolchein, like the Manafulda says. Din in the fashos, 11 lines on the top. Hamamunim al chaye nefashos. Chayin nefashos means food is like culture, and you have to have a base. So the Gemara says, well, let's go all the way. If it's din in nefashot, you have to have 23. Sechta Sanhedrin. You don't have to have 71. That's only the one in the Beis Hamikdash. But din in nefashos, you have to have v'yu esrei v'shalosh. And the Gemara says, this is a drush question and answer. That no, that who mitzamislein until you gather 23 people, who misaken, the guy will die from hunger. Like when the Rebbe spoke once in a Fabrengen in the context of why don't you make a bracha before you give tzedakah, birchas hamitzvos. So you have various answers. I would say the most classic nigla answer is because you never make a bracha on a mitzvah that has no limit. There's no shiur. But the Rebbe says, imagine a poor person is hungry, needs to eat, you're going to have to make a bracha. But you're just a chachasid. So you're not going to make a bracha before you're going to the mikvah. Then after the mikvah, you have to put in the garter. And by the time, then you have kavanah. And by the time you finish, the guy will die from hunger. The Rebbe was screaming, don't make a bracha, give the guy what he needs. That's the bracha. So same thing over here. Yeah, 23. So you're going to gather 23 people. People need to eat. You have to have two for Sarada. A third, that's something that it's not going to impede the time. Adarabba, we said that 3 will go even quicker. Now, the Gemara says like this. Rabbi Yossi b'shem Rabbi Yechanan. Another rule. Ein ma'amidim shnei yachim parnas. And this is Gavaldik. Now that we established that aside of the rule that ein sarara al hatzibur pachos mishnayim, but we said when it comes to giving out tzedakah funds, they're giving out, not the collection. The collection is only sarara because you're forcing. The giving out is 3 because it's like a beis din. 2 judges, a beis din is out of 3. They cannot be brothers. Or we mamish look at them like judges. No, they don't have to have dayanus. But they have the similarity with judges. You don't have 2 of the 3 judges, certainly not all 3 cannot be brothers. You can't have 2 brothers to be this tzedakah distributors. And the Gemara says, Rabbi Yossi abar chad v'trei nachin. And indeed, there were once a city where they didn't know that rule. It was a very kind family. They found them to be the competent, the kind, whatever quality. And there were 2 brothers. And when Rabbi Yossi came there, he removed one of them. And but Rabbi Yossi right away said he didn't want for people to suspect that he removed the brother because that guy is not trustworthy. This has nothing to do with trust. He made a public statement that I didn't find that person to be somehow sinful. He made sure that no one should suspect the one that he removed. Now, why did he remove the Reuven and not Shimon? Not because of trustworthiness. Stuff has to do with I don't know, giving tzedakah also, like the Gemara says on Bava Basra, it's not just what you're giving, it's how you give it. It's about the feeling. There's a lot of potential humiliation that the recipient has. People are humiliated even to ask for a loan. Think about yourself if you needed a loan. Shemsach. So maybe it's about having that additional capacity of making the recipient feeling comfortable.
Which of the brothers he chose?
Yeah, no, that's something else. That's not about being trustworthy. That's about having a greater delicacy in interacting with people who at this moment need to be the recipients. Now, Yoisi all lekatra, which is the name of a place, and ba'a moik maloin parnasim, and we needed people to be in the position of being administrators. Veloy kablan aleh, and no one wanted that responsibility. And guys, this is a Jewish ethic to run away from authority. Again, there's a big difference, guys, between oisik b'tzarchet tzibur. Where's the gabbai? He's not here. No, it's oisik b'tzarchet tzibur. People run towards. That's a quality, but that's not a position of authority. Authority means this. Authority means that one person has the legal right to coerce someone else to do something, particularly when it comes to him giving money. That's something that we don't have today. But if we were to have it today in certain scenarios, people don't go in that position. So all the Amar Kumeyain, Rabbi Yossi needed to inspire them to undertake that position. So he quoted for them a Mishnah in Shkolim. If you remember, within the Mishnah speaking about the 15 offices we had in the Beis Hamikdash, and some of them were of extreme importance. And one of them was Ben Bibi, or you can say Ben Bibi, Bibi Weiter, Bibi, we can't get his voice here, Al Hapokia. So one of the offices was that they needed to have wicks, and the menorah's lamps had the size to hold each one a half a loy, And the reason why they held a half a leg is, as we learned, is because the longest night needed that amount of oil to burn through the night. Now, the beauty about the Beis Hamikdash is that what happens if you have a summer night? You also had the same half a loik, and you filled it up all the way until the top. And since there was a seder, there was a rhyme and a rhythm, and every morning the kohen went up there, he made Hatavas Hanedos. Hatavas Hanedos was to be done when the candle is let out. So if you remember, we spoke about it in Shkolim. So what do? In other words, when you have a lamp and you want it to end at a certain time, you don't only control it, if you want to use that word, by adding or diminishing the oil. Part of it is how thick or how thin the wick is going to be. So during summer, they would put thicker wicks. It was a chachma. Now, it wasn't the biggest thing in the world. So there was you got it? No. Summer they put a thicker wick. Thicker wick makes it burn quicker. So because you wanted the lamps to go out earlier. So when the morning came, other than the Ner Hamaravi, there was a seder. So there was a family Ben Bibi, and they were in charge al hapokia over the wicks. Now, this family is counted with the most important of families. So ma imzeh, family of Ben Bibi, shenesmana al apsila. Relative, you can say it's something not so significant, because if you would not have that office, you would put in the week so they would burn a little bit longer. Nothing would happen. He's counted almost an equal to the Gedoyla Hadar, as he writes the Penimoshe in the bottom, that one of the offices was Psachia. Psachia was Mordechai. And then you had, he writes Pinchas. Pinchas, the Shmata maker, that I remember, because all of the Polish Yidalach, right? Pinchas HaMalbish. Whenever they one the Polacks or the other, I talk about people that will learn it. The guy was successful with the Shmata. Oh, Pinchas HaMalbish. They said it with maybe a tinge of jealousy or together with a bracha, whatever it is. So these were big offices. I mean, you have to wear clothing. Mordechai was the Gedoyla Hadar. And even the one that was then Yochanan ben Pinchas. So you had the greatest people, which were the head of other offices. Ben Bibi wasn't such a great person. He became equal to them. Atem, sha'atem bismanim al chayin nefashos, giving out the monies or foods for people's life, pasha, is called chayin nefashos, is like kolchrein. How great will your merit be? So even though it's good that you don't want to have the responsibility that comes along with being an authority figure and the potential corruption and arrogance, like the Tzemach Tzedek told Rabbi Hillel, Tzibel is all from the Rebbe, but Chassidus Yosef Chazir. In other words, yeah, you might lose spiritually. You might pay a price of becoming arrogant by becoming the authority, but it's needed. And on the other hand, you'll be counted with the other greats. Daf Ayin Aleph Amud Beis. Weiter. Rab Chagai kad have mekim par nosim. When he would appoint people, you know what he would do with them? Have a matin loin oiraisa. The Marafulda says he would make them hold the Sefer Torah. Making a Sefer Torah was to imply two things. It's not that they took an oath. Loimar shekol serara shenitna mitoira nitna, that all authority is really only granted through the Torah. Through the Torah means, but when one is faithful to the Torah, that means kiyum hamitzvahs. To the Torah means when one makes an extra effort to learn Torah, both. And where do we know that? Pasuk in Mishlei, when the Torah says, so to say, be means within me. That's in reference to the Torah. Be malachim imloich. And indeed, Rab Chia bar Bar, which is Rab Chia bar Abba, Taich interpreted the pasuk in Mishlei to means Mikayim Archoinen. Archoinen, as we mentioned, that the Talmud Yerushalmi is a mixture of Aramaic and Greek. The word Archoin in Greek is an officer. That Torah is Mikayim, the leaders. In other words, there is leadership, especially of authority, which means government. As far as Jews are concerned, authority is only through Torah. For us, it's the end of the world when you have leaders in authority that are not faithful to the Torah and learners of Torah. There was a beautiful gem, not a while back, maybe a year ago, and there was, now they interviewed a very elderly statesman. These were people that were high up in the Israeli government during the 6 Day War, during the Yom Kippur War, and there was a common theme. that they felt that the Rebbe had certain positions, which were the correct positions, which they agreed to in theory, but they were unable to stand the ground. And there was an older man, I forgot who he was a big guy in the government. He says that it looks like that if you're not connected to something higher, you can't. A human being doesn't have the koyach to hold certain lines. You can't. And it's that we all know that, but especially when you have the position of authority, which will determine chayin nefashis, when it comes to the safety of the Yidden and Eretz Yisrael. And that's how it has to be. Okay. So God willing will inspire all of the Chavdei HaKnesset. The goal is not to change them. The goal is to get them all to become faithful to Torah and to the mitzvahs and faithful to the limud HaTorah. That will change everything. All right. But that's on us to make happen. Not going to happen by itself. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Lezer, which Rabbi Eliezer, Hava Parnas, and Chadzma Nochis Lebesing. Now, Parnas also meant that he had these funds at home. Now, these are human beings. What happens if he has to travel? So the distribution would happen through his family members, which is okay. So Chadzman Nochis Lebesa, he once came back home, and he asked his family members, my Avidatun, tell me, when I was gone and the Aniyim came, tell me exactly what happened. Amrulei, so the Bnei Mishpacha, the wife and his kids told him that Asach Chad Siyah means a group. A group came, and Ba'achlon, Ushasain, that they ate and they drank, and they were so grateful that Vitzaloin Allah. They blessed you, they prayed for you. He wasn't happy with that. Rabbi told him, Leka Agar Tov. There won't be a big reward. In other words, guys, the honor that people in authority might get when they do what they undertook to do, that honor, so to say, takes away this chad. However, in the Chas Zman Tinyon, there was another time that he traveled. And while he was away, in his stead, his family members were the ones who did their job of giving out the tzedakah funds or food. And when he came back, he asked them, how did it go? So they told him, and this is the norm, that there was another group when you left. Another group came. And they ate and they drank, but they were very not content. There was a lot of complaints. And they were so dissatisfied with the service that we provided that they belittled you, or maybe even they cursed you. Said, that's good. Now I'm doing my job. In other words, there's a human nature that the recipient, because of his humiliation of being a recipient, if there's an arrogance, there'll be a humiliation. If the person won't be arrogant, he won't be humiliated. But we all have an ego, we have arrogance. So how do people deal with that humiliation? One common psychological reaction is to be upset as their benefactor. In Yiddish, they give an example. If you have someone you want to get rid of, you know how you get rid of someone? Do him a big favor. Give him a loan. He'll never see him again because he'll be uncomfortable by looking at you because you're going to remind him how little he is because he needed you. And one of the ways he deals with it is by being very discontent, by being a complainer, which is a big part of the problem of the world today. Why are people complaining with such abundance? Because they're arrogant. So they feel humiliated. So they have complaints. And that's something that a tzedakah distributor has to know from the outset. It means if you're doing it for honor, you won't even get reward. You have to do it to al minas that people will be discontent. Gavaldi. And if Rabbi Akiva, they wanted to appoint Rabbi Akiva as such a charity administrator. So Rabbi Akiva responded, let me consult with my household, my wife and kids. And Halchon Basrei, so they followed him. And Shama Kolei, the Yemar. And they heard a voice, let's go, that this is Rachel, that told him, Almanas Mitkal, Almanas Mibalzio, that you should only consent to the job with the knowledge that you will be belittled, that you will be shamed. In other words, when you undertake something, you have to know what you're getting involved in. And many people have the delusion by thinking that if they're going to be so kind, especially to the community, it's going to afford them honor. If they're getting honor, something wrong is happening. The more good they're going to do, the more they're going to be belittled, the more they're going to be shamed. And Almanas came. In other words, if you're ready for that, Gavaldik. And I'm reading inside the Pnei Moshe, middle of the Amid. It's the middle of the Pnei Moshe to the Ma'avaditim. The Shomu Koil Shomu Tekabal Alatzmach Almanashi Yikalalucha Almanashi Yivazucha. In other words, if you are able to handle, that's what they were telling Rabbi Akiva. People, after you do them a favor, People are going to be upset at you. People might curse you. People might humiliate you. If you can handle that, then accept the position. If you can't handle that, then don't do it.
Did he accept?
For sure.
This was when he came back from yeshiva.
This is for sure when he came back from yeshiva. Why? Because he's called the Rabbi Akiva. Before he went to yeshiva, he's called Akiva. When I grew up in Brazil, there was a beautiful Bnei Akiva. And the Haraidim, they didn't like them so much because they weren't frim enough. So they would call them Taka Bnei Akiva, not Bnei Rabbi Akiva. That was their, everything needed to be a negative. All right. Rabbi Bar Zabda Omar, that one, that is Falgun Rav Rabbi Yechanan, that there was a machlokes between Rav, the leader of the Jews in Babylonia, right? Surah, ultimately. And Rabbi Yechanan, Chad Omar, normally it's the first, second. Let's go. Rav says that Midagdik and Biksus. Let me go back. This is the other topic that we touched upon 2 days ago. And that is how much of a investigation must be made when people come and say they need. So Rav says like this: if someone requests clothing, then we have to make an investigation to make sure he's not a fraudster. I just want to limit that. If a person comes naked, you give the guy clothing. Speaking about someone that's coming with rags, and as we'll see in a moment, there's three madregas. There's rags, that's humiliating clothing. Thank God we barely see this today. And then there's giving him average clothing, and then there's giving special clothing. Why would you give a person special clothing? So to quote again, that's the Sugya in Ksubas, that they machserai ashe yachsaloi. When the Torah speaks about giving tzedakah, the Torah says, fill up his need. That he is lacking. He is lacking means it's subjective. If someone is b'nei toivim, if someone used to be wealthy, then he lacks more. He was used to a higher type. That person should get fancier clothing. We're not talking about that here. We're talking about the guy has rags. He's not naked. Then you give. And he's clothed, but he wants to wear normal clothing. So Rab would say, before you give it, make some investigation. But never for food. They ain't medagdik and b'chai in the fashis. Maybe the guy has food at home. The guy asks for food, give him food. The other one says that af biksus ain't medagdikin. Why? Beautiful. And one of the ways of Brisa Shal Abraham Avinu says the Marafulda Shegenai Hu Leben Brisa Shal Abraham Avinu. It's humiliating for anyone that's part of the covenant of the Jewish people, descendants of Abraham Avinu, to go unclothed. Again, it doesn't mean autumn. I want to make that clear. It means to go in rags. No Jew should go in rags. The guy might be a fraudster. I don't care. That's not the point. Nebuch, double Nebuch. You have to help him out. Now, says the Gemara, Masnisa, there is a Braisa. It appears now. Rabbi Yechanan is the first heir of the Amoyroim. It appears from the Braisa that the Amoyra that says that Af Biksus ein medagdikin. Masnisa plig alman da Oman Af medagdikin. There's a Braisa that appears to say that we have to investigate. What's the Braisa? Look how bekitzer the Yerushalmi is. So, guys, keep your finger in the Gemara and look inside. The Braisa is 5 lines before the end of the narrow lines in the Maraful. And we're going to have to know this Braisa because the Gemara is going to go back and forth a bit with this. Mas Nisan, this is a Braisa. Pligi v'chulei. Hainu, ha Mas Nisan, the Meiser Basar Achi, the Braisa that the Gemara is going to bring soon. And where is that? It's really written in the Tosefta. Perek Dalet Halacha Ches. And these are the words of the Braisa. When do we say that what? It sounds like that they have to make an investigation, that you have to make an investigation. If you don't know him before, a guy just showed up. The first line under the Gemara, in the Marafulda. So when you read those words, it sounds like that whether you know him, whether you don't know him. And if you don't know him, you have to investigate. So does it not sound in the Braisa that you have to make an investigation? So the Gemara says, no, nothing can be proved from there. No. That when a guy comes and he's not asking for average clothing, a guy is asking to have real, let's say, balabatisha clothing, expensive clothing. And indeed, if this person used to be wealthy or wealthier, if that's the way he used to dress, so then you have to give it to him. That is where the Braisa says make an investigation. What we were speaking about before is not giving him the fancier clothing. A Jeff Rudis' suit. For that, only if you were wealthy before. If not, you don't get that. But to get a Banana Republic suit, maybe, that you give to anyone, the Braisa is not addressing that. Says the Gemara weiter, actually, the Braisa says so clearly that what? Bisman she'ein makir noisoi. These are the words that Marav Fulda just quoted. Abel bisman shemakir noisoi. That even though, if you know him, then you give him clothing, and look at the last words of the Braisa. Clearly, that's, means that according to what he was accustomed to, accordingly, if the guy before dressed in very fancy clothing, another thing, we're living in LA, no one dresses in fancy clothing. Okay, to hear, we're living in a world that the wealthier you are, the less fancy you dress. How great is that?
But it costs more.
It costs more. That's I wouldn't know that.
Another reason why you would wear fancy clothing is like today when you have like a wedding gemach. Like there are times when you need a dress, right?
Correct. Well, actually, the Gemara says that I have to remember where it is. The Gemara says that in the Babylonians say that in Eretz Yisrael they didn't need to wear fancy clothing because their person gave them the honor. And in Babel, since there was a big step down in level, the only way that you can get the right honor is by being dressed nice. In general, correct. I'm just saying they didn't get it today. That's the way it is. When a person is very wealthy, he doesn't need to dress himself up. It's good. It comes from a lack of something. You're trying to compensate for something. Okay, right. But Frag the Gemara, hold on. The Havamina is, this is important. We're quoting a Braisa that is initially understood, not the way we'll see in the Maskana, that the Braisa is speaking about how long do you have to live in a city for you to be chayiv to participate. Don't forget, you were forced. It was like a tax. That's what the Braisa is. We didn't know that. It sounds like this is about for you to qualify to be a recipient. It says in the Braisa, Havamina, for you to be allowed to take of the mezoinos, you have to live in the city for 30 days. L'ksus, you have to live 6 months. Why 6 months? Why 6 months? You know why 6 months? If, again, based on this erroneous understanding, on the premise that's going to be corrected, that it's about receiving, for people to know whether you are straight or not, you need more time. Like, how would you know? Maybe today you have, it's a different world. When a guy is there for a long amount of time, if really he's wealthy and he's just acting as if he's not, they get that he's so cheap, he has an illness. You need 6 months. Because if you don't have to investigate, why would you need 6 months? So forget, it sounds like that, and there the Braisa is not speaking about likvoidoi. V'haraya bezoinus is not likvoidoi, food. So the Gemara says, no, you misunderstood the whole Braisa. That Braisa is not about receiving. That Braisa is about giving. In other words, it's a surara. You are chayiv to give tzedakah, but you have to be a resident. The question is, how long do you have to reside? Now, by the way, I just read those words. It doesn't fit with the flow, so we'll do the easy way, which is to follow the gears of the Gra that says that delete the Gemara's kasha. Let's begin on Daf Ayin Beis. V'hatani. It says in the Braisa lefasin. Fasin means masim for taxes and for other tzedakahs, which we'll explain in a moment what that refers to. 12 months. 12 months. It sounds like that what will be taxes or tzedakahs 12 months. It sounds like that is about how long do you have to live in the city for you to be chayiv to give. And that would imply that the lamazoinas 30 days and for clothing 6 months, that's to receive. Because only the end of the Braisa appears to be speaking about giving. Does that not imply that the beginning of the Braisa is about how long do you have to live in the city to become a recipient, and all that will prove that for ksus, you have to make an investigation. So the Gemara says, no, the whole Braisa is only speaking about how long do you have to reside in the city for you to be chayiv to participate. Oy, ki lite. It's all about contributing. And yet, to give to the mezoinas, 30 days. For you to be chayiv to give in ksus, you have to live in the city for 6 months. You have to live there. Now, if that's the case, what is pasan and tzedakos in addition to mezoinis and ksus? What else is there? So he says Gavaldi that pasan is taxes. Now taxes, the Gemara doesn't have to explain. Taxes goes to building the roads, building the bridges. What the city collects, the garbage collectors. See, today we live in a society that you pay taxes, and then in addition we pay for the roads. In addition, you pay for that's ganovin. I'm saying for the city needs, that's taxes. What's the tzedakah? Mezoinus, you already gave after 30 days. Ksus, you gave after 6 months. Tzedakah means b'schar soifrim umashnim, that you are obligated to give money for tuition. The way it worked then is that the city hired teachers to teach soifrim, which is Tanakh, and to seek Mishnayos. How long must you live in a city for you to be chayiv to participate? That's the little tzedakahs. How great is that? And by the way, that touches on upon a whole sugya that really teachers are not supposed to take a salary. And that's the way we know it. And here you already see that the system used to be in some places where teachers did get some salary, but they did not get it from the parents. It was one of the funds for the city, and for that you have to live 6 months. A lot more, huh?
1 year.
12 months. But in other words, the whole Braisa is about giving, about receiving. Again, there's no proof. There's still a machlokes Rabbi Yochanan, but you cannot prove how much digduk must be made for someone to merit to receive funds.